Why should I listen to you? That is the unspoken question that's pretty much on the mind of any audience out there. And that is why the first few seconds are so critical in any presentation. And today, in episode 30 of PitchZone, we are going to tackle the topic of the first 30 seconds and how can you captivate your audience right off the bat. I think this is especially important in today's fast-paced world where our attention spans have shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. Hello, my name is Claudio. I'm a presentation coach and the host of PitchZone. And PitchZone is a weekly program that we put together, a couple of coaches. And today we have a total of 4 coaches, including me. The first one, let me bring him in. My dear friend, Nathan Gold. Nathan, I hope all is well in San Francisco. It's early in the morning. Good morning to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning to you as well. And happy to be back. This is a real fun topic. And I look forward to seeing what all of us talk about today. It's always fun.
All right. All right. Now, for those who join us for the first time, Nathan Gold is also a pitch coach. He hails from San Francisco, from the heart of the Silicon Valley. He's been doing this for 15 years and by many is considered the #1 pitch coach in the world. So it is a tremendous, tremendous privilege and honor having you here, my friend.
Thank you.
And pitch coach number 2, Scottie Spurzem. Actually, Scottie, you are a language coach, also hailing from San Francisco. Good morning to you, Scottie. How are you?
Yep. Good morning. I'm well, thank you. And it's a beautiful day here today. We actually got some sunshine and it's lovely.
Beautiful. So. Is this the natural light that comes through right now, through your window?
Yeah, and it makes me look like I'm a blonde, but I have gray hair, but most people think I have blonde hair.
It looks really, really good. Nice job on the lighting there. And our third coach for the day, joining the discussion, is Rick Pollak, joining us from Boston, Massachusetts. Also a very experienced coach. You have coached a lot of TEDx speakers, right, Rick?
That's correct. Yeah, I work with TEDx speakers and also with technical presenters. That's my specialty. I spent 35 years in technical sales, giving a lot of presentations, and know what happens if you don't grab people's attention in the first 30 seconds. I've learned the hard way about that.
So critical. This is so critical. The first 30 seconds, because it truly is, or the first 15 seconds, or whatever you want to call the first moments that you have to captivate your audience. Because if you do miss that moment, nothing else that you're doing matters anymore. Because if it's in an online meeting, you lost your audience to one of the 37 open tabs or to email. And if it's in a meeting room somewhere, you'll probably lose your audience to some daydreaming. So we want to avoid that, and we want to help you to avoid that. So Nathan, let's start with you today. What are your thoughts to the topic of the opening, the first 30 seconds, and how to captivate your audience right off the bat?
Thank you for the opportunity to go first. And I will share my most favorite story related to this captivate moment that we all have when we walk up or stand up or get in front of a camera with an audience that sometimes we just don't take advantage of. And some of it depends on the situation and whether or not you're introduced and things like that. But just assume this is the situation. There's 10 companies that have to present for 5 minutes each on stage at the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City. People go up, they do their thing, they go off, no questions. The fourth, I was in the room, so I know this happened. I was there. Fourth guy jumps up on stage, literally runs up onto the stage, kind of the way Ringo Starr used to deal with his nervousness when he performed. He'd run up to his microphone and then he was fine. He starts out and says, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thrilled to be here to share with you the machines that we build that turn water into money." And we all of us stopped whatever we were doing and we looked up because we wanted to know what this machine is that turns water into money. And that is simply the use of a simile, analogy, or a metaphor or a figure of speech that is totally unexpected from your audience. And when you share something in the very first 30 seconds with your audience that's unexpected from a traditional expectation of what they are going to see, you can usually snap them out of wherever they are, pay close attention to what you're doing, and then it's yours from then on. And by the way, this guy, I met him afterwards, and he came up to me and said, "Thank you for telling my story to everybody," because from that day on, I told that story to everybody. And I said, "How long did it take you to come up with that idea?" And he said, "Well, I was watching the people before me, and I knew I had to do something to get the audience excited." He said, "I thought about that on the stairway going up onto the stage." I what? I mean, so these things can really amplify the engagement of your audience, partially because they're unexpected. Similes, analogies, and metaphors, while they might seem a little gimmicky in some cultures, I get pushback on this quite a bit, especially in Europe. They say, "Oh, I could never say we build a machine that turns water into money. That's redonkulous." Well, okay, then maybe say it a different way. But to use a proper simile, analogy, metaphor, we get these pictures in our head, and now it may be the one and only thing that people remember from your presentation or your pitch. And perhaps 12 years later, like today, I know I tell the story all the time, but when I run into people who were at that session, and it's kind of easy to, in this world, to bump into people who were there. What was the one presentation you remember from that day back then? Do you remember at the Kaufman? He said, "Oh, yeah, the guy that builds the machine that turns water into money." And by the way, I should finish it out. There are these little canal turbines. They come ocean size or backpack size. And he was making a backpack size. It's this little machine. You throw it into the rushing waterway, you tie it off to the side, and you plug in the USB port. As soon as the water starts spinning the little flappers, you're generating free electricity. So does he build a machine that turns water into money? Maybe, but the other way is what most startups do. Here's how most startups would start their presentation. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're excited to share with you canal turbines. Want to know more?" No. All you need to do is replace canal turbines with whatever you're building, and that's how your audience sometimes reacts.
Yeah. And Nathan, I agree that the unexpected grabs people's attention. And whether it's TED Talks where people just come up with a standard first 30 seconds about themselves or happy to be here and what a great day, that doesn't grab people's attention. For investor pitches, the experienced investors see the same thing day in, day out, where someone comes in and talks about, here, this is going to be a game changer. This is going to change the world. Here's my team. And they all roll their eyes and say, yeah, I've seen that before. So something unexpected, something that's going to get people out of their, oh, this is different. This is usual. Let me lean in and think about it. So the unexpected is good. And as Nathan said, the similes, the analogies, the metaphors are a good way to do that. But another thing within that first 30 seconds is to make a connection with the audience. You need to make both a emotional and an intellectual connection with the audience in that first 30 seconds. And an emotional connection is you have to make sure you're talking about something that about. It has to be something important to them. So if it's an investor, it's making money on on investing in you. If it's a product pitch, then it's something that's going to be a lot better than the status quo. It's something that's going to make their lives better. But that's the emotional connection. The intellectual connection is, why should I listen to you? What are your qualifications? Why you? And that could be something of thinking of, what are your qualifications? Have you done this before? And this is something that I always counsel my clients to be very careful about, because you don't want to come across as an out-of-touch intellectual PhD. A lot of people will say, oh, you've got a PhD in this and you should lead with that. But I think a lot of people say, well, yeah, they're an academic. They're not the right person to make to be an entrepreneur. So you have to be careful about that. And it's something called status alignment, saying if the audience will say, he's like me, she's like me, they understand that's the collection with both emotional and intellectual, but intellectual meaning that they have that status there, but also they understand you. So it's both emotional and intellectual connection. So, Scottie, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I was gonna mention that, and I can't remember the number, how many nanoseconds it takes, like a nanosecond or 3 before somebody trusts you. I mean, we do this all the time, whether we're out in the world at a bus stop or we're watching someone give a live presentation. So there's an issue even of body language, I would say, that you want to be comfortable and confident when you get up there, even though we're not always that way. And the memorability of it, or making it memorable, is always interesting, and sometimes it can backfire and sometimes it can work really well. So you want to make sure that whatever your metaphor is, or your costume, like I remember being at one event where a fellow came out in a top hat with a cape and a wand, and he pulled his top hat out, and it was the magic was a technology, but it was how magically he could make this technology change the world. And I had mixed feelings about it. It was almost some ways I thought he was bragging. It was way too far, it was too big of a reach. But on the other hand, it was immensely memorable. And part of what we're doing as we're telling these stories is we want people to be able to repeat it when they go back to their investment committee. And if you're looking at 10 presentations or 100 a week or more, and your meeting is the next Monday, you're going to have to remember something about each presentation beyond the pitch book. So if there's something different, if you have the technology in your hand and you can show it, that's also a really interesting thing. It's got to work for you and fit your person and what works for you. But not all of us can do that, right? I'm not the person who can walk out with a top hat, at everything. So I have to come up with a thing that fits me, and it would be around my specialty or a really great story that hooks people.
Sorry, Claudia, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say that's my 2 cents for the moment. I have many other thoughts.
Okay. And to your point, Scottie, people jump to conclusions very quickly. I mean, on site, as soon as you walk out on stage or begin to walk out on stage, take your first step. As soon as people know who's the speaker, they start jumping to conclusions on a bunch of things. So when you mention the top hat and whatnot, if people are walking up there in a traditional, looking set of clothing, people are going to jump to some conclusions, whether you want them to or not. You can't stop that. But when they do something a little unique like that, it's absolutely a nice way to hack your connection with an audience sometimes by the way you look and what you wear. Personally, when I was going out into the live rooms, which I've only been in like 3 or 4 since the pandemic, but back then, since I wasn't wearing ties anymore because it was overkill, I would wear either cowboy boots or red sneakers. And I wore cowboy boots because hardly anybody wears cowboy boots in business, not to brag, not to just, I don't know, it really wasn't to brag. It was just kind of my thing because they're very comfortable and I can stand in them for a long period of time. But people come up to me and say, Nathan, those are really good looking boots. That was cool. I liked watching you on stage because that was so cool to see you walking around on stage. And basically it's an unfair advantage if you choose a piece of clothing or something that doesn't scream, but kind of helps you stand out on site. Same thing for on-screen presence, folks. In this flat world we're living in, how you show up on camera in those first few seconds, even before you start speaking. What does your background look like? What do you look like? That's a pretty important place to take a close look of what you could also do in the online world, which we're all spending so much time in.
And I want to add, Claudia, do you have something you wanted to say first?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit more about captivating the audience because, from Nathan was saying, it's about your physical appearance is important. But I mentioned that connection within the first 30 seconds. And when I work with people on TED Talks or investor pitches or product pitches, I'll ask them, I say, are you covering the three cons? They'll kind of look at me and say, what are the three cons? I said, it's connection, context, and contrast. So I will tease them. I said, in order to build trust, you have to be a con artist. Cover the three cons. And with that, the context and the contrast can also go into that first 30 seconds. Because if you're talking, whether it's a TED Talk or an investor or product pitch, you are talking about your idea, why it's different than the status quo. So that's the context and the contrast. And especially if you're talking to grab people's attention, like we're talking about before, whether it's the machine that turns water into money, or that if you come in and you start off in that first 30 seconds and say, everything we know about, or the world as we know about, is going to be changed. Everything you have now, if you don't change within 2 years, your company's going to be gone. It's going to be obsolete. And whether you're talking about AI or ChatGPT or something else in the market, you're going to grab people's attention because by showing that context that they need to make a change from the status quo, and then showing the contrast before and after, with or without, those tie in with the connection. So if you can make the connection with the audience in the first 30 seconds and then either get right into the context and contrast in that first 30 seconds or right after that, once the audience says, okay, yeah, that person understands me, they understand my business, and I can trust them. I've connected with them, they understand us. But then those three cons, I think, make a talk interesting and also are memorable. So that's something I think that I will advise people to make sure in those 30 seconds, once you make that connection, make sure you're showing a context and a contrast on top of that.
Wow, I love that so much. And now all of a sudden I start to feel comfortable being a con man. Thank you, Rick. This is awesome. I just want to very, very quickly welcome our viewer online. I'm not sure whether you're on YouTube or Facebook, but if you want to write or say hello in the comments, that would be fabulous. We had a little hiccup here today with the links, the different links. So they changed very short or briefly before we started the show. So yeah, we're gonna have one viewer, and hello, and I hope you're enjoying what you're hearing so far. Now, to me, there is one key in getting an audience's attention, and that is to instill a certain curiosity. And that curiosity, if you think about the example that Nathan mentioned before, turning water into money, right? That instills curiosity because the audience immediately wants to know, what is this? How does this work? Or one of my absolutely favorite openings of a presentation was in 2015 at the World Championship of Public Speaking, when Mohammed Khatani walked onto the stage and he didn't even say a word. But he grabbed the audience's attention with a shock, with a shocking opener. He simply stood on stage, took out the cigarette, and started to light the cigarette. And just before the flame hit the cigarette, he put the lighter away, looked around the room like a kid caught with the hand in the cookie jar, and said, "What?" At that point, the audience started to laugh. And they are all with him because the title of his speech was The Power of Words. And having somebody walk up on stage and proceeding to light a cigarette, it makes the audience wonder, where is this going? How does this connect? How does this link to the topic at hand. So what are some of your favorite openings that you have seen or that you have coached your clients? Nathan, you already mentioned one. Got any other one?
Well, there's plenty. And the one that I wanted to make sure for many of our audience tend to be in the startup world, and they're either presenting to investors or potential partners and so forth. So while this might not be, a very unique way of getting people's attention in the beginning, waiting till your team slide to establish trust, as Rick was mentioning a moment ago, and credibility with your audience is a bit late in the game. Usually the team slide shows up around slide 10, 11, 12, late in oh, by the way, we have a team. Let me tell you about that. But up to that point, all you are is forgive my use of simple pronouns, you're either a man or a woman. And I get it. But who are you? Why you? That's the whole point of today's session. So I want to recommend that all people, not just people presenting to investors, but if you're doing a keynote, you're doing a TED talk, anything, in that early 30 seconds of your talk, maybe TED talks are a bit different, you need to establish credibility for being the speaker. And if somebody doesn't introduce you, you need to say something about yourself that makes you trusted by the audience for the next few seconds while whatever you have to deliver starts coming out of your mouth. But Rick, to your point earlier about a PhD, and you don't want to stress that. I get that. You don't want to brag and pound your chest and say, "Oh, I've got a PhD and I'm an academic and I know my stuff." At the same time, there's absolutely nothing wrong in my book when a presenter starts with, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. 12 years ago when I was defending my thesis, da 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 da." So it's not like I'm bragging about it. It's more like now I've established my credibility that I have 12 years of experience since then. So it's a double whammy with, oh, you have a PhD or an advanced education. And I get it. Not all of us have PhDs, and we can't use that line. But I'm here to tell you, every one of us have something we can say to establish at least momentary trust with an audience, so they're open-minded, willing to listen, and they're not saying, "Oh, who is this person? Well, I don't like them. I don't trust them." So you don't want that to happen, right, Scottie?
Yeah. I was working with a group at the Japanese Exchange Trade Organization, and one of the presenters, startup, he'd been doing it for a couple of years, had a really cool technology, and I'm like, "Well, why you? Like, you're telling me all of it. This technology sounds fascinating, but I can't put it together." And so I was talking to him after the rehearsal. It's like, "So, like, why you?" And it's like, "Oh, well, I quit my job. I was a professor in this subject for 15 years at a prestigious university in Japan." I'm like, you need to say that, like, you need to tell us that. And you can do it elegantly. I think Nathan has started saying it was the humble brag, way back when. You can do it very gently, but very clearly, and it makes it super memorable. You could also start out with, after 15 years of teaching my specialty, I quit my job 2 years ago. And that's the kind of thing that people will go, "Oh, okay, wow, she quit her job, or he quit his job. Ooh, I'm interested, to hear more of that." And there was another one, Nathan, you and I worked with this group. It was for Fish 2.0, Faragora. Wonderful May. I still stay in touch with her. And we worked with people for about 6 weeks and, trying to suss the stories out. She had never presented before. It was her boss was, putting her forward to do this. I think she'd never traveled out of Thailand before, quite frankly. And she was telling this really heart-wrenching story about a child growing up in the shrimping world and just toiling, day in and day out. I was like, "Well, who is this little boy?" She was talking to a little boy, talking about a little boy. It's like, "Well, who is this little boy? Is it your brother or a friend? Can you tell me more? Because I can't quite get the connection here." It was going like this, but it didn't mesh yet. And she said, "Well, that little boy was actually me as a little girl." And I still get the chills when I think about this. And I said to her, "If you feel comfortable telling this story about yourself here, that would be one of the most powerful things that they had developed, and they still have this great technology to clarify the supply chain for the shrimp to marketplace. And she did it, and she was amazing. The entire room was thrilled, and it was ever so memorable because you're hearing the story about this poor child in this circumstance with the technology that changes them. And then she's like, well, that was me. So if you have that story and are comfortable sharing it, you should go for it, because it goes beautifully with the 3 cons. And I'm gonna quote you, Rick. I love that, but it's not really a con. It's an honest, within an honest context. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and Scottie, that makes me think of from that with stories, and a story, and I think this might be counterintuitive to some founders, and a story where you're showing vulnerability and failure and a willingness to listen and be coached works very well with investors. And I think a lot of founders find that counterintuitive. They want to talk about, oh, I've been successful in this, I've been successful in that, and my 3rd startup, and I've had all these exits and made all this money. But I think, and this gets back to, I think, one of the reasons why I'm hesitant to have people talking about an academic background with certain audiences, because if you come across as a know-it-all professor that is not going to listen to anybody, then you have turned off some people in the audience. So I think mentioning that, along with a vulnerability about talking about a failure, how you recovered from that, and in a story format, that's going to grab people's attentions and give you that credibility, but in a humble kind of way instead of a bragging know-it-all kind of way. So I think that's important. But coming back to connection, you want to, in that first 30 seconds, come across a story is a good way to start, but again, just making the people in the audience care about you, know you're interested in that topic, and you are that trusted advisor, that person who is going to help them move, or to accomplish their goal. And of course, that goal is going to be different, whether it's an investor, whether it's a customer, whether it's an audience for a TED Talk. But I think that's the important thing, of just establishing your credibility through a story as well. And showing some vulnerability works a lot better than most people would think initially. So, Nathan, what do you think?
And to add on top of that, yes, I saw a talk by the original pitch doctor in New York named David Rose. It was, I think, 2009. And he had done a TEDx talk about investors and what they look for and so forth. And at the very end of his 18-minute talk, he realized he was running out of time. Sorry. And so he said, oh my goodness, I want to give you the top 20 traits that investors look for in a CEO or a founder or co-founders. And he lists all these things down, and he says, so which one do you think is the number 1 trait that investors look for in startups? And nobody got it right. But Rick, you alluded to it, which is being coachable. So if there was one thing to take away from today's session, if you're a startupper and you want to have a second meeting more easily, make sure that when you're meeting with these investors, that everything about you indicates that you're a coachable individual. And maybe we have that as a topic for another session about how do you indicate that I'm coachable. We can certainly go through that. But I do want to talk about another side of the first 30 seconds that you might not expect, and that is what happens in those first 30, what do you do in those first 30 seconds if things go really badly for you? For example, Michael Bay, the director of Transformers, walked out on a stage at the Consumer Electronics Show. I think it was 2015. It's online. You can go see it. And there was a teleprompter in front of him and an MC on the stage, and it was the first Samsung curved TV the world had ever seen. And Michael Bay walks out onto the stage, and the MC says, so welcome, Michael. And then he said his prompt. Michael looks down at the teleprompter, and the teleprompter goes dark after about 9 words. And he starts to fumble a little bit, and the MC sees that the teleprompter has gone down. So he says, Michael, don't worry. It's all right. We don't need a script. Just tell us, what do you think your movies are going to look like on this beautiful curved TV? And the point I'm making to all of you is Michael had no backup plan. He had nothing to go on. So his fight and flight kicked in so hard that he basically stopped breathing. You can see him kind of freeze up and go back to the script and try to get it. But that was a failed moment because he literally started the script again. Teleprompter is dead. Can't see it. He paused. I'm sorry. And he literally walked off the stage and never came back. So my point to all of us is that it could happen to any of us. That freeze moment or flight moment, we all experience it, but you need a backup plan. And he didn't have one, even though the MC tried. What was the backup plan? Well, there could have been 3 or 4 of them. And in another session, I'll tell you all kinds of things you can do in a backup plan. But the point is we need to have plan B and maybe even plan C for those first 30 seconds.
Wow, yes, absolutely. Plan B, plan C for sure. And there are many, many more letters in the alphabet just in case, right? I've actually seen that video with Michael Bay, and what if he could have just disappeared, he would have. He must have so regretted even signing up for that talk there, because he couldn't get one word out, and that is pretty bad. Now, Scottie, before we were talking about a personal experience that you had, kind of like freezing up, or do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Because even though it's from a personal experience and it's not a presentation, well, in a way it was a presentation and a very important one. So, Scottie.
Sure. So I was sharing earlier that when my husband and I got married, I was happy day, thrilled to be there. When the minister asked us to say our vows, with this ring I thee wed, I said, and the minister looked at me, my husband looked at me. I was sure I had said it out loud. I heard it. It was loud and clear, strong voice. Looked around, and then I said very quickly, with this ring I thee wed, and everybody started laughing. And my husband laughed, and the minister laughed. And it's actually one of the best photos from our wedding album because somebody caught it. And I froze, and I was able to spit it out, and I did it. Spit it out. That's not a kind way to say it. I was able to say it. But it also made it memorable. There's always something wacky or funny that goes on at a wedding. There's often something wacky, and not always funny, but wacky, that happens at a presentation. Whether it's your, you trip on your shoes and trip going up the stairs to the stage, or you forget, what you were going to say, or the technology fails. And quite frankly, the shifting to presentations, when the technology fails, I think you can prepare for that. It almost always fails, or something is going to fail. And so when it does, you just, easy for me to say, hard to do, but you just fall back into what you know. So, yeah, and I can say this in hindsight for poor Michael Bay, but no teleprompter. Well, here we go. So the reason I'm so excited about this giant curved screen is that you could imagine watching today, we could say Avatar on this, and it feels like you're really in the center of it. It's almost like being in a surround sound theater. That's what I would come up with if I were pretending to be a do-over, for Michael Bay. So have that in your mind's eye, like assume there might be some sort of failure, and what might you start off with? And one of the many things I tell my clients to do is practice your presentation with somebody who you're comfortable with, but knows absolutely nothing about what you're talking about. Because if you can say it very simply and recall it from memory like that, it's going to resonate with everybody, and it'll be easy for you to draw upon that reservoir of knowledge if your technology fails. And I'll add one other thing. Way back when I started in investment banking and taking companies public, I had to travel on the road shows with the CEOs and CFOs. And I'm going to date myself here. It's in the days when we had glass slides. So we had to carry, I'm not sure what those are, but we would carry 2 sets. We would ship a set ahead, and then we would carry a set with us. And one time we were trying to reorder the presentation because the only way you could do it was physically move these glass slides around. And 2 of the slides got stuck in the same spot. And of course, I was in charge of that because I knew the presentation wasn't great and we were, maneuvering it on the fly. And so I was like trying to get the presenters to just feel comfortable with going without the slides because it was stuck in the slide projector. Finally, I got it out with my trusty Swiss Army knife, and we were able to go ahead with the new order. But sometimes you gotta wing it, and that's a memorable thing too. It shows your human side, and that you have a sense of humor. Oops, I spilled coffee down the front of me. Oh well, oh well.
Yeah,
and not bad for a stain, but here we go. So.
Yeah, and Scottie, let me add on to that because with all the presentations I've given, there have been times where my computer got a blue screen like 2 seconds before I was ready to start. And again, with people, with technology, but there's something beyond technology that we should plan for in the plan B, plan C, plan D, and that's time. If you have a 30-minute you're all ready to start, and the people you're giving the presentation to, and they say something came up, and then your whole script changes. It's like, well, you've got 5 minutes, or hey, I've got to leave, but walk with me to my car and tell me about it. And your whole pitch deck is gone, your slides are gone, your 30-second opening might be gone, but you've got to realize that you have to plan for that and just be able to get your point across in a conversation instead of a presentation, and make sure that key point, giving the people the reason to care, what that big idea is, what that call to action is, that you can say that in a walk later as well, even though you prepared it in a perfect pitch deck or whatever, because something's going to go wrong and you've got to have that plan B. And Nathan, I know I've heard you tell stories about that before with things that have happened with people you've coached, but
yeah.
What's your feeling about that?
Totally agree with everything you're saying here. And not only do you need a plan B or C or D, you need to practice those plan Bs, Cs, and Ds. Because if you don't practice them, you just got them in your mind, that could make it even more stressful. So, Scottie, I want to finish my contribution today by a story you reminded me of that we did in the early 80s with those slide trays. They came in 80 slides and 140 slide trays. You couldn't fit the glass slides in the 140s. I know I'm dating myself too, but listen to what we came up with. My VP and I had a presentation to show the entire company what was new and exciting we were going to sell our products. Of course, we put together all these beautiful slides. We put them in the tray. We were all set. And Bill gets up in front of the room and he says, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are so excited to share this new sales presentation with you." Click. Oh, shit. Oh, the slide jammed. So he said, "Nathan, can you help me with that?" Sure. I was like inches away, waiting for my call. So I grabbed the tray and I'm...
Oh boy. Yeah.
Oh, shh. 140 slides spilled onto the floor. All plastic. The entire room in the first 15 seconds went... And it was a joke. We planned every bit of it. He said, "Nathan, may I have the second tray, please?" But it was a fun moment. It was an internal peer only kind of VP. It was so much fun, but we were so nervous because we had a hard time getting the slide to jam.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Anyway, fun times. Thank you for reminding me of that very special moment.
Oh, sorry, Scottie. Yes, please.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in. was thinking about when Rick was mentioning, if you don't have a chance to give your formal presentation and somebody grabs you, to walk to the car or something. And it also goes to what Nathan was mentioning about being coachable. It can show, you show who you are by how you react in different circumstances. And it's not always the problem or the error, but it's more how you work with it, right? How you deal with it. So the joke is really funny, but if it had actually happened, and if it had actually happened and you had a second set of slides, that would also show that you were prepared, right? These are people who think beyond the moment, or, she can think on her feet even after she spills coffee or doesn't say anything for the first few seconds. So it can also help portray the character, like, really the essence of who you are. And that's another thing that's memorable and that allows people to like you. So don't be afraid to show that and share that.
Indeed, indeed. And I so love this story, Nathan, because, and Scottie just mentioned the key word, right? You can't be much more memorable than that. I make a bet that if you would bump into one of the participants, the audience members today, many, many, many moons later, they probably still would remember that moment. And that, I just made a mental note for one of the next PitchZone episodes. Let's talk about how to make a pitch or a presentation memorable. I'm already looking forward to that. But for now, we've already gotten to the end and I've left Bob hanging out there. Bob, thank you so much for joining us and telling us that you're out there. My apologies for not bringing this one up a little bit sooner. It's lovely to have you here from Colorado before you go to work. Wow. That's very, very cool. Bob, thanks a lot for joining us. And for those of you that watch this on replay, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please feel free, click that subscribe button at the bottom, and you will be notified when we do other sessions just like this one to help presenters excel with their pitches and presentations. All right, Bob, no worries. I'm starting to remember you guys are here on Thursday. So we look forward to seeing you again next week. We look forward to seeing everybody that's watching this again in a future episode. And with that, I want to thank the coaches. Thank you very much for your valuable insight today, and not just today, week in and week out. Much, much appreciated. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are in the world, and we shall see each other again next week. Bye-bye.